Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Okay, we're here. We're back. It's May. It happens to be RJ's birthday that we're recording this on.
Happy birthday, RJ.
RJ,
Thank
very
you.
glad. Very glad.
May the
you were
4th be
born.
with you.
Oh, gosh.
That hasn't gotten old yet.
It's only been a thing for like the last 10 years or so.
And that's your
that was
birthday.
not a thing when I
I'm
was.
so sorry.
I don't mind. It's memorable. It's memorable.
Okay, it is. It is.
I was born on Star Wars Day.
Exactly.
Well, have you done anything special besides record the Mockingcast? What do you have in store for your birthday?
Just had lunch with my wife. Gonna have dinner with the family.
Nice.
And then there's some parishioners that have like a taco party tonight, so I'm gonna go to that. So it should be a fun day.
Fun.
And talking to you guys, which is obviously the highlight.
Well,
Yeah.
Cinco de Mayo is tomorrow, so that's kind of exciting for the taco eating.
For white people. Yeah.
Sarah, it's been a lot happening in your life. What's worth sharing? What do you want to say?
Well, I just had the best, then worst week last week. I got to see my nephew, and he is a precious 5 pounds. He's so small and sweet, and cook tons of food and help my brother and sister-in-law understand appropriate bath temperatures for babies. And then that night, I got appendicitis at 4 a.m. And then I did what you should never do, which is I did not want to wake them or the baby up. So I stayed in my bed for 2.5 hours until my brother got up to go to work at 6:30. And I had an appendectomy in New Orleans, Louisiana, which the nurses' accents were worth their weight in gold. So
Were they like sort of Cajun accents? Or
I mean, they're New Orleans accents, which
Right.
is a little different. It's like a Southern meets Brooklyn, but
Yeah.
they were just like the loveliest. It was, I got through it. And my friend Kim, who is a saint among women, came in and took care of me the same day, and like only a mother would. And I always continue to feel like when the shittiest things happen, I'm the luckiest person. It's like my life thing. So
And plus, you
Worst
lost
things-
some weight, so you shed a few pounds. So praise God for that.
Yeah,
You're just
right
like a
before
little-
swimsuit season.
you're
Thank
a
you,
little bit thinner.
Jesus.
Thank you,
Yes.
Jesus. Yes. And you'll
Have
have a
I
killer
already
scar.
ordered 2 swimsuits? Yes, I have. Yes.
Did you get it? Did you get a tummy tuck also?
No, but I was
while you're
like-
down there.
I was like, could they do that? Is that possible? But
Anything's possible, Sarah.
anything's possible.
As John
I
Adams would
don't-
say, if you don't ask, the answer's always no.
I feel like having what could you do possibly surgery in New Orleans isn't on my list. So
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That was not a bucket list item for
it was
the
not.
Reverend Condon.
It was not. No.
Well, it was fun. I mean, I was, of course, in New York at our
Yeah.
unbelievable conference. It was so great. And everyone, of course, is asking after the two of you. Lots and lots of Mockingcast listeners and Mockingcast love, and really, really touching stuff. But I was, as if you didn't have reason to be gone, to inform people that Sarah was in the emergency room. There was a lot of you were being prayed for by just a collective of 400 people up in New York City. So
Sarah, you had an excuse.
I
Sarah.
did. I
Yes,
did
which
have
is
an
good.
excuse. Yeah.
My
was-
excuse is just I was exhausted. So that was it. Which is a bad
it's also-
excuse, but that's my excuse.
also-
I don't think anyone was surprised, RJ. I think it was
I hope not.
par
I'm not
for the
surprised.
course.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, honestly, before we jump in, though, I do need to say thank you to Calvary St. George's Episcopal Church in New York City. And this is 15 years of this, and they're so giving. There's so many of their parishioners that are involved. And Jacob and Melina were just real godsend. And then Megan Ritchie just deserves a medal and a street named after her. In my opinion, she's done such a knockout job. Well, anyway, I just want to say how grateful I am. I needed the shot in the arm. To be honest, it every time there's so many details to take care of before one of these things, and you just sort of I just look at my wife or to other members of staff. It's like, why are we doing this again? And then you get there, and it's just the most wonderful.
It's like every Sunday.
I
Holy
was
Spirit
like,
time.
that sounds like every Sunday to me. Why are we doing this again? Oh my God, this is great. And then like by Monday, you're like, why are we doing this again?
Exactly. I have my brothers know sort of not to call me the week before conferences because I'll just be like, it's going to be terrible. No one's coming. It's, shoot me now.
Except you were sold out like 3 weeks in advance. What are you even talking about?
I don't know. The Eeyore mind can find something to fixate on, shall we say, regardless of what the data or the evidence suggests. So, but 15 years of doing the exact same thing before this conference, you'd think I'd learn, and I haven't. But I met with understanding and grace and a whole lot of love in that funny old building in New York City.
And tons of new people, right? Just like
it was like
crazy
60% new people.
Whoa.
Which was, and I,
See, everyone comes once, and then that's it. Then never again. So
yeah, they realize that I can miss next year. This is it was, yeah, and a lot of that are people that sort of picked up Mockingbird through COVID, and we're like, thank you,
awesome.
you guys, the Mockingcast saw me through this very difficult time, and that's what It's really nice to hear. I wish I could sort of bottle it up and send it to you guys too. But let's start in. We got some cool things to talk about today. This first piece, Sarah, this I think will scratch you perhaps where you itch, given the babies that you've just been around. It's in Vox, The Baby Name Boom by Rebecca Jennings. This was mostly news to me, though I'm kind of tangentially aware of it. Baby names have never been more crucial to get right. On TikTok, a slew of creators have built followings of tens of thousands discussing baby name trends. And crucially, baby names to avoid because they're trendy. They reveal baby names they liked but didn't use, baby names they never want to see again. They predict famous influencers' baby names, sometimes with terrifying accuracy, and what names will soon be all over every daycare class's list. Many have even started paid consulting businesses to help people name their babies. Baby name gurus guess that the topic has gained massive popularity because of our cultural fascination with uniqueness. One influencer is quoted saying, "My guess is it's gone hand in hand with the rise of social media," referencing the common practice of announcing your child's name on Instagram, often with personalized Etsy merch. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. You told your family and small circle of friends. Now you see all these names on social media, and it makes them feel like they're super popular, which makes people want a unique name even more because they're like, well, a girl from my high school used that name, so I can't use it, even though they're never going to see that person. As a Jessica, Jessie Paquette is intimately familiar with the burden of having a trendy name. I always say to my mom, you carried me for 9 months and you come up with Jessica after all that work? But she says, in all my videos, I'm like, if you like it, use it anyway. This is just my opinion. And then people are like, you're a terrible person and I hope your child hates you. The irony here is that having an extremely popular name used to be the norm. For most of American history, families typically named their children after an ancestor, which meant that there were usually several Marys or Johns per age cohort. It wasn't until the cultural shifts of the 1960s, with smaller families and fewer children, that parents wanted to bequeath babies with names that reflected their individuality. Parents are thinking about naming kids more like how companies think about naming products, which is a kind of competitive marketplace where you need to be able to get attention to succeed, said Laura Wattenberg, founder of Namerology. These days, naming children can feel like an unwinnable game. You could be accused of trend bandwagoning if you name your daughter, say, Harper. You're called a tragedy, spelled Tragedeigh.
No, ma'am.
If you go with something truly original. Or you're simply a bore whose child is destined to be one of a billion Liams. Hence the baby name consultants who say their DMs and emails are overflowing with requests from confused parents. What do you think about this? I have seen a little bit of it out there on Instagram, and I've at a church and in a community where people are having lots of babies. And yeah, I remember after we named our oldest son Charlie, feeling kind of affronted by the fact that like 3 or 4 other families that we knew also named their kid Charlie and thinking, oh no, have we embraced a trendy name? What's wrong with us? Are we so predictable? No one wants to be part of a trend, I suppose. But what do you think, Sarah?
Well, I'm thinking about this relative that I had, and my Aunt Becky is going to kill me because I can't remember her name. But maybe it'll come to me as a whole story. Anyway, she nursed my grandmother when my grandmother was born because my grandmother's mother died in childbirth and my grandmother's grandmother took her in. And this woman was a cousin who nursed her. This woman is the only reason why there are so many of us, you know? And her name was it was like Maud or Beulah. It was something like that. And I have tried so fiercely every time. Of course, I wasn't going to use it. Right, but every time there's been a baby girl in the family, I'm like, well, we have no. Oh, I remember what it was. It was Blanche.
Oh.
Golden Girls. Thank you for being a friend.
And people are just absolutely not. So, yeah, I mean, I totally...
It also literally means white. So that might be a problem.
Does. But, we also have the last name Blanco in my family. So it's a variety.
Blanche Blanco, done. Done.
She sounds like a comic book character. Right.
White and Cuban. So, yeah, I totally remember, especially with Annie, being more worried about this than with Neil. And of course, we ended up choosing a family name that was super meaningful for us, for her, and it's Anastasia. But I'm gonna be real with y'all. The other day I saw, and I can't remember his name, but he seems lovely. The interim rector, I guess would be his title, at All Saints Chevy Chase.
BJ?
Well, yes, BJ. Mm-hmm. They just had another baby, and her name is Anastasia, and I wanted to stab somebody. So I'm like, we're the only Episcopal priest that get to name our daughter some variation of Anastasia. Like, what is wrong with you? So there's a sense of I would love to make fun of these people, but I totally can empathize with that feeling of wanting to be really original. That said, I miss hearing a kid named John. That's a sweet, I have so many Johns, so Davids in my family. And
no one names their kid David anymore.
No, girl, nobody names their kid Sarah anymore.
Yeah.
So,
no one names their kid Rutgerian. I mean, that's just that one's gone way out of fashion.
It had its moment.
Your boys have great names. I mean, Marshall.
Yeah, your boys have beautiful names.
Marshall's in the Paw Patrol, but otherwise, no one names their kid Marshall. I love it.
There was a focus kid named Marshall who I really liked, who went to Davidson. He's a sweet guy. One of my stock jokes whenever I go guest preach somewhere is that, I have a name that I literally can't pronounce. That's not a joke at all. I literally cannot pronounce my name, to the point where I'll try to pronounce it for Dutch people, and they'll give me a quizzical look like, what are you saying? And then I'll spell it, and they'll say, oh, you mean, and then they'll say
They're
my name
like,
correctly.
broccoli? Are you saying broccoli?
Yeah. And my first name and my last name, both impossible, but I do have Heyman@gmail.com, which is pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome.
And my kids have Jackson Heyman and Spencer Heyman, and Jamie has Jamie Heyman. Although, Jamie, my wife's name, is spelled Jaime, like the Bionic Woman. Mm-hmm. There's a certain subset of ladies in their mid-40s who are named Jamie, Jaime, after Jamie Summers, the Bionic Woman. That's is true.
That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
But so when she was Jamie Foster, people would say Jamie Foster. But now that it's Heyman, it's usually like Jaime Heidman. The poor girl. So, but my father was part of this big Catholic Dutch family. They all have Maria in their name.
Oh,
so
that's beautiful.
My Dutch dad was Antonius Cornelis Maria Heyman, and his brother was Nicodemus, who we called Nick. And
RJ.
My godfather was Arnoldus Edvardus Engelbertus Nova.
Oh my goodness!
The Dutch Catholics do it right.
My mind is being blown right now. Those are some names.
They are some names. So we gave those to. We did all family names for our kids. I guess Marshall was a combination of my best man Paul Marshall Taylor and my aunt and godmother, whose name is Marcia. So that was a little bit of a combination. Mm. But yeah, I remember sharing with some very good friends when we were in our 20s a name that we really loved that was a family name. Then they had a son, and they named him that. And we were like, where'd you come up with that name? Like, we don't know. It just came to us. And we're like, ugh. So,
I want to stab someone.
that person shall remain nameless. But then also, my brothers often remind me that when I was a teenager, apparently I thought Seven, Knife, and Blue might be good names for children.
Well, you're right in that. That's a George Costanza. I mean, we're talking about one of the great Seinfeld episodes of all time when George tells a couple to name their kids Seven, and then they.
What did he really?
No, they. But
maybe I'm remembering that from Seinfeld, but maybe.
No, sorry.
Anyway.
I think it's Soda.
Oh, Soda.
Soda,
okay.
And then like he said, the name he's going to name his kid is Seven after Mickey Mantle, and someone decides they're going to use it, and the whole episode is him going absolute bonkers because they're stealing the names Seven and Soda. And he's the sort of character who's been hoarding these baby names for years and years and years. It does betray the people as lifestyle brands I don't know how to construe that in a non-depressing way. I think it is something we think about. Are there going to be how many other kids are going to be named the same thing? Are they going to stand out? Will this capture their personality? I've watched people wait months to name their child because they're waiting for sort of the right.
Wait, month after they were born?
I have.
Months?
Yep. And wonderful folks, but and people for whom words are very important. But I find that must be the pressure to sort of get it right, to feel like there's a right answer to a baby's name. I mean, that's a whole level of.
That happened with Spencer, our second. He was going to be Charles actually, and then we had him, and Jamie was like recovering from her C-section, and she was like on drugs. She's like, "It's not Charles. We're not naming him Charles." So, you're welcome, Dave Zoll.
Aww.
Well, speaking of Charles, let's move on to the coronation. That is happening this weekend. I can't believe we're talking about this on here. I didn't. Hey, you set it up here.
You're so good.
I just walked through the doors you guys open.
Oof.
And this was written to none other than Nick Cave, his Red Hand Files. They said some fans were shocked to find out that Nick Cave, the transgressive rock and punk rocker, is going to the coronation. 5 people wrote in to say, "The coronation? Seriously? What would the young Nick Cave have thought of that?" He says in response, "I'll make this a quick one because I've got to work out what I'm going to wear to the coronation. I am not a monarchist, nor am I a royalist," he's from Australia, "nor am I an ardent Republican for that matter. What I am also not is so spectacularly incurious about the world and the way it works, so ideologically captured, so damn grouchy as to refuse an invitation to what will more than likely be the most important historical event in the UK of our age. Not just the most important, but the strangest, the weirdest." He says, "I once met the late Queen at an event at Buckingham Palace for aspirational Australians living in the UK," or something like that. "It was a mostly awkward affair, but the Queen herself, dressed in a salmon-colored twin set, seemed almost extraterrestrial and was the most charismatic woman I have ever met. Maybe it was the lighting, but she actually glowed. As I told my mother, who was the same age as the Queen and, like the Queen, died in her 90s, about that day, her old eyes filled with tears. When I watched the Queen's funeral on the television last year, I found, to my bafflement, that I was weeping myself as the coffin was stripped of the crown, orb, and scepter and lowered through the floor of St. George's Chapel. I guess what I am trying to say is that beyond the interminable but necessary debates about the abolition of the monarchy, I hold an inexplicable emotional attachment to the royals. The strangeness of them, the deeply eccentric nature of the whole affair that so perfectly reflects the unique weirdness of Britain itself. I'm just drawn to that kind of thing, the bizarre, the uncanny, the stupefying, spectacular, the awe-inspiring. And as for what the young Nick Cave would have thought, well, the young Nick Cave was, in all due respect to the young Nick Cave, young, and like many young people, mostly demented. So I'm a little cautious around using him as a benchmark for what I should or should not do. He was cute, though. I'll give him that. Deranged, but cute. So with all that in mind, I'm looking forward to going to the coronation. I think I'll wear a suit. Love, Nick. Do you guys have feelings about the coronation? What I've found when you talk to people about the royal family, and I feel most American when talking about the royal family in the sense that I genuinely don't have any emotional attachment whatsoever. Perhaps a little bit to, I remember when Princess Diana, when that wedding happened when I was a little boy.
Oh,
And
wow.
I do remember that, like having like a picture book about it. But I do notice that even those folks who, ideologically can't stand the monarchy or have a real hard time with any kind of hereditary or aristocracy, they still can't help a slight emotional attachment to the royal family and almost like a bizarre curiosity. I've never quite understood it, but I come closest through what Nick says. He's like, just put aside all of the actual reason or rationality behind it. There's something that taps a deep emotional well in folks, and that's just, it operates by its own logic, I suppose. RJ, what do you have to say?
I don't really care. I don't. I was talking with a guy, actually an Australian, recently at my son's soccer practice, and he brought it up for somehow.
Oh my God.
For some reason.
Bunch of dads on the sidelines talking about the coronation?
I love
He brought it.
that.
I don't know why he brought it. I
Healthy
can't remember.
masculinity. Okay.
I can't remember. I can't remember why he brought it up, and then he was talking about it, and he was like saying how he didn't care, but then he knew everything about it, And I was like, okay.
You sort of, maybe you do care a little.
Did you see the little viral video of the Boston Celtics head coach when? All right, what's the name of the successor to Charles? What's his oldest son's name?
William?
Yeah, didn't William and what's her name?
Kate?
They came to the States recently, didn't they?
I think so.
I guess.
And they went to a basketball game. They went to a
This
Celtics
sounding familiar.
game.
Yes.
Yeah. And
sounding
so at the
familiar.
press conference, someone asked the coach, whose name I can't remember. I can remember nobody's name apparently today. How did you feel about having the royal family here? And totally stone-faced, he goes, "Were Mary, Joseph, and Jesus here?" And everyone laughs. And he goes like, "Were they?" And then he's like, "No. I mean," he's like, "That's the only royal family I care about."
Oh my God! What a Boston Celtics move too.
It was so good.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, a guy I played tennis with said that to me. He's like, "I thought you'd appreciate this."
Oh my God, that's so good.
It was so great. So I guess first of all, I do love the show The Crown, although the last season was not as good as previous seasons.
Okay.
So I'm here for The Crown because I like good entertainment. But I guess I'm only kind of interested in the monarchy in the way that it bears witness to the power of imputation. Because that's all they are. That's it. They just have this thing that people have chosen to give them. They're not anything, they're really nothing special.
Right.
It's just that people choose to treat them as if they are special, and therefore they're special, which again, that's sort of what we believe about how God treats us. We're not special, but he treats us as if we are. So that's really the only thing. But yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sarah,
When
do
is
you
it?
have any
Is it this
thoughts?
Saturday?
It's this week.
Although I will say, if I was invited, I would 100% go.
Yeah.
And I love what Nick Cage says about like, come on, people. This would be a cool thing to be invited to.
Wouldn't
why not?
aren't you curious to know what it's like? I mean, that's what he's
Yeah.
saying.
I'll bet it'll be really, really boring. Don't you think?
I don't know.
Long?
I don't know.
Long and boring?
Sarah, what do you think?
I spent enough time in church. Continue.
I mean, so for me, this makes me think of the loneliness stuff we're going to talk about, because I think how isolated and lonely we must feel that we think we wouldn't go to this if we were invited. That's really fascinating to me that young people are like, I'm assuming they're young, they're probably not, but whatever people are like, you shouldn't go to this. It's like, to me, it speaks to the things that we turn down now that we wouldn't have turned down 10 or 15 years ago, because we're just so overwrought with ourselves and our time on the internet, generally speaking, and how much we miss out on. That's what I think of, that many people came to him and said, you shouldn't go to this. It's like, my God, look at the things we're missing out on. So I think this is I actually think Nick Cage's response is a beautiful witness to saying yes to the things we're invited to. So
Say yes to the things you're invited to.
yeah.
And
it's
all those
more
people who
fun.
said you shouldn't go, they would go.
They would go.
Were
I hope
invited.
they. Oh my
would
God! I hope they
100%
would.
go.
Literally, if you wouldn't go, you need to get help because you're not leaving your house enough. Yeah. I mean, what an interesting. I'm not a big royals person. I did think. I mean, I said this on the podcast when Queen Elizabeth died. For me, she was very meaningful because she was the figurehead of the Anglican Church, and I just think how incredible.
Yeah, and Charles is a dweeb.
I know, and he's kind of a bummer. So that's less exciting to me. But RJ, I love what you said about imputation, because I mean, these two fools definitely don't deserve, you know what I mean? They've been having an off and on affair for a while. They were mean as snakes to Diana. Like, these two fools definitely don't deserve this. And yet, right, there's a whole ceremony that's going to happen. So
interesting. One of the things that I was forwarded this past week was that there's been a resurgence of interest in the Book of Common Prayer in England.
Oh my God, that's so great.
As a result, partially of this sort of royal weddings.
There are now 2 people who are interested.
100%.
No, seriously.
God uses all things for good.
There was a headline: "Is why millennial men are turning to the Book of Common Prayer," and it's not only because it's taught to them in school. It's that, I guess, the combination of the Queen's funeral, Harry and Meghan's wedding.
Sure.
There's been and the destabilization of COVID, but even before that, I guess the prayer book was being seen as something older than 20 minutes ago that you could hold on to, and there's something theological and pastoral and spiritually very profound going on. I don't know if that boils down to the royals, but it's certainly, if that's a side effect. I mean, I think the Book of Common Prayer is pretty great.
Yeah.
RJ?
We've been getting a lot of, not a lot, but like a lot more than we used to, college kids coming to church. And we're going to start a little college group next year because one of them asked to. One of them was like, can we start a group? But one of the things they said was, we're happy to do like whatever, like let's do some Bible study, some dinner, but we definitely want to learn about the Book of Common Prayer. We want to understand why is it we worship in this way, which wouldn't have been my first thought, but that's what they kind of want to know.
Interesting.
That's so cool.
Well, yeah, I just love what Nick also when he says, "I'm not going to judge my current actions by what I would have thought of them when I was 22." I mean, we all. I was probably wiser then in certain ways, and more demented in other ways, and like that's an albatross for anyone who's a sort of public figure. You have to you're not only judged by everyone, in the audience, you're also they want to judge you by what they consider to be the standard of you, of like your past self. Mm-hmm. And our past selves they're just that, they're past,
and they're just as problematic as our current. So
yeah, and that's and
judgier probably.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
When they're younger. Yeah. Certainly when they're younger. Well, let's talk about the loneliness stuff. This is very powerful to see. We've talked about loneliness on this podcast almost every single episode.
Almost all the time. It's all we talk about.
It's simply the air we breathe. And I think it's very important to talk about. But it's one thing to be seeing in social science. It's another thing for the Surgeon General of the United States. According to CNN, the Surgeon General laid out a framework to tackle loneliness and mend the social fabric of our nation. This is one of the articles about it. Widespread loneliness in the U.S. poses health risks as deadly as smoking up to 15 cigarettes daily, costing the health industry billions of dollars annually, the U.S. Surgeon General said Tuesday in declaring the latest public health epidemic. About half of U.S. adults say they've experienced loneliness, Dr. Vivek Murthy said in an 81-page report from his office. We now know that loneliness is a common feeling that many people experience. It's like hunger or thirst. It's a feeling the body sends us when something we need for survival is missing. Loneliness, I think of as a great masquerader. It can look like different things. Some people, they become withdrawn. Others become irritable and angry. I think the time you get concerned is when you start experiencing a feeling of loneliness for prolonged periods of time. If you feel lonely, you can pick up the phone and call a friend, and then it goes away, or you get in a car and see a family member, and that's okay. That's loneliness acting like hunger or thirst, a signal our body sends us when we need something for survival. It's when it persists that it becomes harmful. The advisory also writes, given the profound consequences of loneliness and isolation, we have an opportunity and an obligation to make the same investments in addressing social connection that we have made in addressing tobacco use, obesity, and the addiction crisis. We are called to build a movement to mend the social fabric of our nation. It will take all of us, individuals and families, schools and workplaces, healthcare and public health systems, technology companies, governments, faith organizations, and communities working together to destigmatize loneliness and change our cultural and policy response to it. I mean, he lays out there's like a six-pillar framework about strengthening social infrastructure, which sounds like the setup to, inject like money into churches almost, just sort of to make it easier for for groups like ours to exist. And then there's also in there he includes sort of reforming digital environments and how those have not been contributors to connection. But I was blown away. I don't think I was expecting this. I know we talked about the Minister of Loneliness that was appointed in the UK a number of years ago, but it is such an acknowledgement, I think an official acknowledgement that this is more than just feelings. This is health. I've wanted this to understand it as public health is good. It's not a bad thing to do. It's a start, and to especially we talked one time like you can say you're addicted to something, but to admit that you're lonely is like much harder in our society. I think that is really telling. I love the fact that churches can be places where people connect. I don't think that's their primary purpose, but if that can be a secondary or tertiary benefit, then by all means. And if that brings people in the door, I'm happy about that too. But I don't know. Sarah, what do you think?
Oh, just something funny. I saw on Instagram recently, this person had said like, my kids told me the other day that when they grow up, they're going to sleep in as late as they want, and they're going to stay at home all day, and they're going to eat whatever they want. And she was like, I had to tell them that sounds like depression. So I actually think that the most important part of my ministry to these college students that I'm leaving, like I would have told you like, oh, it's so they know the love of Jesus is for them. I think the most important thing I did was create an antidote to loneliness. I really do. Because, God created it, but like that I was able to make a space for that. Because with them coming, having gone through high school during the pandemic, and then, some of them were in college that I ministered to during the pandemic, it's just been so interesting to we're doing this work right now and thinking about who they're going to call next. And it's really them defining the community. And you've worked with college students, you get no feedback. So you're just like, you don't know if they like it, Them talking about how they could count on seeing other people, like twice a week, no matter what, they were going to see other people, was massively important to them. They were like, we have to keep this. This has to be a part of who we are. So, yeah, I certainly have experienced loneliness. I think I'm really nervous about the move to Tennessee because I won't have a job, and I'm already anticipating the loneliness of being in a house by myself in a city that I don't know, And yeah, which is why I'm like, looking at jobs that are like, totally different from what I've done before, because I just know it's so good for me to be around people. It's so good for all of us to be around people. And I don't think that I think the one way to stop all the gun violence is to get these like automatic weapons off of our streets, like immediately. I want to be really clear about that. Also, I think us being in greater community with each other would be incredibly helpful for some people. And I wish that there was more. It would be a miracle to me if the government stepped in and was like, basically did a stimulus for any organization that, supported community. Because, how many more people could we reach, and how many more people could we connect? It would just be incredible.
Amen.
That is so sad to hear that your college kids are so lonely. Like when I look back on college, I would think of that as one of the times in my life when I was the least lonely.
Well, I think, you are hyper brilliant. And I can say this, you've got a kid coming to Rice. You're hyper brilliant when you come to Rice. you have worked really hard. You've been very focused on your studies. And I think sometimes socialization doesn't come naturally to some of them. And then I think the pandemic certainly exacerbated that. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a sense of loneliness, but you don't even really know that's what you're feeling. You just know that when you're around people, you feel so much better, right? So I think that's probably I would love to be like, it's because I preached the gospel. But like, I think the most important thing I did was to help college students not feel lonely.
I mean, the stats bear it out that it's like 15 to 24-year-olds are the most lonely.
Sweet
I mean, it's
of course,
it's
these
not
precious young
people who are actually surrounded by their peers, but
yeah,
or it is people that are surrounded by their peers. RJ, what were you going to say?
Well, just that the love of God and the grace of God's very often, if not most often, mediated through other people.
Totally.
Who just love you unconditionally. And you can hear it. You can hear it. But to actually experience it. And that's why I feel like magic really happens, like gospel work really happens when the message is being proclaimed in word, but then also in the midst of a group of people where you just kind of feel loved. And I will say, like, that's not to be weird. That's like consistent feedback I receive about my church, which I think was true before I got here, is it just feels like a place where you can kind of be yourself.
Yes.
And you don't have to prove anything to anybody. Yeah. And there's a warmth to it and a welcome to it. And, so I think when you get that combined with hopefully talking about Jesus, talking about the gospel, it can be really powerful in people's lives. So, like, I think that's why, every Thursday morning I got 25 middle-aged men showing up for a Bible study on the Gospel of Matthew. It's pretty, it's pretty amazing.
That's the same feedback. That's why it's very important that to me, at least, that Mockingbird always does these in-person events, because this is what.
Yes.
There are a lot of people that are isolated out there, and I can't find a faith community or church that is remotely healing. And that said, like in New York, when I spoke, one of the things I did was try to lay out some of what I consider to be our methodology on this podcast, which is not something, there is a methodology behind what we're doing.
Oh my God, we have methodology. What is it?
Well, Sarah, it's actually you're one of the people. You're one of the pillars of it. It's when confronted with bizarre behavior or just amusing behavior or truly alienating behavior, you have to ask yourself, how might this be a cry for help? How might this be an expression of suffering? It doesn't mean you condone the activity. It doesn't mean any of that. But, Sarah, when we were talking about money on the last episode, you said, I think this is in some ways a cry for help because people have been so let down by so many other things, so many other institutions. And of course they would say money is the only safe harbor here that I can control. And I think when it comes to the way that this plays out with loneliness is you look at part of like social ills or just in your own town when folks are acting in truly antisocial, shall we say, ways. It bears asking the question, if these statistics are true, it bears asking the question, how might this possibly be an expression of loneliness or a misguided attempt to find love or to feel acknowledgement or the sorts of things.
Assert value, assert worth, like I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. And I think that they're right in that it's not just blood pressure that goes up when you're lonely. It's all sorts of other things that the whole world falls apart, basically. But it does have physical manifestations. But that's what I think is always important. Instead of judging the behavior immediately, you say, how might this be a cry for help? How might this be the action of a lonely person? If I were to believe that our culture is profoundly lonely and despondent, but like how might that inform how I understand what's going on? And it wouldn't excuse, but it might explain, and that can be helpful, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I mean, you just did it.
I think that's where the grace gets in, right? Is when you can kind of take a minute and think about your own loneliness and your own failure to be like a pleasant person to be around, right? And why that is your struggle and why that is everyone's struggle. I think that's how the grace gets in.
Well, here's to talk about an interesting attempt to mitigate loneliness. This appeared in The Atlantic by a guy named Adam Mastroianni. The title was, "I Ruined 2 Birthday Parties and Learned the Limits of Psychology." He begins by saying, the 2018 meeting of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology was buzzing with a new idea. Talking to strangers, research showed, could be surprisingly delightful. A few years earlier, 2 researchers had persuaded a bunch of Chicago commuters to talk to one another during their train ride in exchange for a free banana. The participants reported having an unexpectedly wonderful time.
Oh.
Now, several other teams have been reporting similar results. And he says, well, he decides to put this idea into action, that he needs to interact with more strangers. And so Adam loves escape rooms. And so I guess there's escape rooms that you can sign up for. Like you can see if there's any room left in there's a, and so he found a couple open
That is Jamie's
slots.
private hell.
He found a couple open.
Something my wife will never do.
It's Josh's. He's the same.
7 or 8 people signed up, and there's 2 spots remaining. And he decided to sign up for both of those, thinking he could make friends with strangers. And of course, what he discovers is that there's basically groups of friends, and then he's just this random guy. He talks about the second escape room. He says it was unmistakably a birthday. The room was a prelude to a party. The gang of friends were newish parents who had left the kids with a babysitter for a little adult fun. And the room was prohibition themed, and all the other guests were wearing old-timey clothes. The ladies wore flapper dresses and fascinators. The men wore suspenders and spats. I wore jeans and a plaid button-down. Once again, I embarrassed myself by solving virtually none of the puzzles in the escape room. I walked around with fake thoughtfulness, picking things up and putting them down. When we got out, the group assembled for a photo. Let's do one with Adam and one without. Someone offered weakly. That's okay. I gotta go, I said, already fleeing. And he says, where was my surprisingly delightful time of meeting strangers? Why had science lied to me? He wants to talk about more how this generally plays out. He said, psychologists sometimes act like we're compiling a how-to book for life. Year by year, we scratch out the old wives' tales, folk theories, and cognitive biases, and then replace them with evidence-based guidance for making better, happier decisions. But we are not compiling a how-to book for life. Many of our studies fail to replicate, but even if every paper were 100% true, you could not staple them together into an instruction manual. Each new finding in psychology presents an opportunity to pick out the most useful bits, learn from them, and ignore the rest. We're already used to doing this in other contexts. When we hear a narrative, we understand that some details matter, like Brutus was betrayed by Caesar, and some don't. Brutus wore a toga. We know that a story shows us what can happen. Sometimes friends turn on you, not what always happens. Every friend will turn on you. Nobody has to tell us how to reason in this way. I acted like the studies showed that conversations with strangers always go better than expected, rather than showing that they sometimes do. And I took the research literally, go meet people right now, rather than seriously, which would be more open to meeting new people, but, don't be stupid about it. Learning how to apply the findings of psychology research is not like learning long division. There isn't a handbook, and nobody can tell you when you're doing it wrong. You pick it up slowly, painfully, through trial and error, when you see the crestfallen faces of the people whose birthdays you've ruined. No amount of expertise can speed up that process, which is why psychologists can study happiness and marriage all we want, and yet some of us still end up depressed and divorced. But here's one finding you should take literally. Don't sign up to do escape rooms with strangers. I thought it was very funny, the idea of we'll take one photo with Adam and one without him. Get lost, you weirdo. But I do think it's neat to say that interactions with strangers generally kind of are unexpectedly wonderful for more people than would admit that. But then for him to go and put that into practice in this almost fundamentalist type way is what he's describing. Because they were talking about one-on-one interactions. I don't think groups with this one random person is a completely different scenario. But what did they talked about how-to books? I think we're dying for the law, and we want to turn, psychology now as sort of a secularized form of the law of if I could just figure out the exact correct way to do something, I will not be lonely. And in this case, it backfires. So I don't know. Have you guys ever had an experience with strangers, or what do you think
my
about? It's like, Sarah, I just have when I read this, I thought Sarah's got to have some sort of story about this.
So, funny thing, last week, I got out of surgery, on Wednesday, stayed the night at the hospital, was pumped with like 8 hours worth of antibiotics, like the whole thing. Thursday morning, I leave the hospital with my beloved, like basically mom fill-in, who is maybe the funnest person I know, and super sweet and generous and brilliant and all these things. What that also means is that night when we were going to have dinner, she was like, let's go out.
After the appendectomy. Right.
Yes. And so we went to this place, Pascal Manally's, which is like old school New Orleans. And, I knew immediately I might have made a grave error because she's like, let's get raw oysters. And I was like, okay. And
Raw oysters.
and they gave us a coin and they were like, we're going to hold your place at the bar with these signs. Go over there and this guy's going to like crack them open, right? And it was incredible. The guy has been doing this. He's been working at this restaurant for 39 years doing oysters. And he had his own little kingdom. I mean, it was very New Orleans. And, the only thing about raw oysters in New Orleans is they're Gulf oysters. So it's basically just a raw chicken breast. So not easy for me to eat post-appendectomy.
Too big.
They're so big.
Ugh.
We lowered our number to 6, but then we went back to the bar, and then these, because it's Jazz Fest, these young, beautiful people come in. They're all new parents. They're out together. They're old college friends. Kim immediately turns around at them and is like, y'all are so beautiful. When I tell you that they just attached to her, I mean, she's a loneliness antidote, if anybody has, just attached to her. And at 8:45, I had to be like, so I got out of the hospital this morning. I just tell that story. I don't know why. It just was such an interesting encounter with strangers. It was so beautiful. And of course, they want to know how we're connected. And so I tell them about how my parents died and how Kim and her husband David is. I mean, it was just, and they were like crying. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is over the top beauty, right? Also, my stomach hurts because it has holes in it. But I think the other thing I think about is, and I feel like this is something we try to do well from our little spot in the Christian world, is that preaching is very dangerous to me when it tells us what we're capable of. And preaching only works when we tell each other what God is capable of. And so I think that's where this weird thing happens in psychology, where we think we can get like a play-by-play, like you do this and you do that, and then you're happy. And we hear sermons like that from people all the time. And it doesn't work because people are these like beautifully messed up, complex creatures who like get a surgery and then go eat raw oysters at a bar in New Orleans, it's just, I don't know. I mean, we love therapy. We always say that, but it isn't as easy as the books lead us to believe. And I think that's why I find a real theological home in a place that's not trying to say, this is what you're capable of, but instead says, we're not sure what you're capable of. This is what God is capable of.
Yeah.
Yeah, the moral is don't try to break into a pre-established group of friends in an escape room. Now, when everyone's in a bar in New Orleans and drunk already, and you happen to be the most outgoing person on the face of the
world, you're like a tiny, beautiful blonde woman.
Then it might work. Exactly.
Then it works.
But I will say, one of the beauties of having small children, Dave, and going to endless sporting events, is that you end up becoming friends with strangers. Because you're there with other dads and other moms, and you kind of talk to them and get to know each other, and maybe you meet them at first, and you're like, do I like this person? I'm not sure I like this person. I'm not sure if they like me. But then, you spend enough time together, you're like, okay, I can hang. And then your kids like each other. But the whole thing about the predictability and controllability of life is just so totally true, right? To me, I've said this before. I've told groups of young people who are dying to, find somebody and fall in love. I was like, okay, who has an image in their mind or like a list of the perfect person? And I'm like, now blow that up.
Yeah.
Rip it up, tear it up, because the person you marry is going to be just about the exact opposite of the kind of person you thought you'd be with. You actually have no idea what you want or need. And so the more open you can be with that, the more likely you are actually that maybe, and by the way, falling in love is a miracle. It's just a miracle. That's all it is. You know, it's not something you can make happen.
Yeah.
And then also, this is totally geeky, but I do find like quantum physics really fascinating, because when you get down to the quantum, do you know about this? Like when you get down to the quantum level, particles behave differently if you're watching them versus if you're not watching them.
What?
Yes, perceiving quantum particles changes their behavior.
Oh my gosh.
So somehow the fundamental
children.
nature of reality. Yeah,
Just like children.
What are you guys doing up there? It's too quiet. How did you know? How did you know? Your mother has magic powers. So the fundamental nature of the universe, at least the physical universe, is completely strange and unpredictable. You know, so, and that's just true. And the more we can just, what does Jesus say? Every day has enough trouble of its own, right? One day at a time, expect the unexpected. Don't get too freaked out. God is over it all. It's all going to be fine. Say hi to attractive people in bars in New Orleans. But do not eat gigantic Gulf oysters. Oh my God, it's too big. It's a terrible choice.
It was.
Yeah.
But especially post-appendectomy. That's the whole part of it is
raw
like all
out of the Gulf.
like, I
Have you heard of the
guess
BP oil spill? For God's sake,
you didn't
woman.
just have like your foot, you know, a broken
you
foot
still
or
alive?
something. It was your actual stomach that was being operated on.
God. Wrong
Well,
with
let's
you?
move to something that
You always say yes. I got invited to the coronation. It was just at a bar in New Orleans. Okay,
Yep.
you just say
there
yes.
you go.
right.
We say yes to what we're invited to.
Yeah.
You're more integrated. Well, let's end with something that's very powerful that came in this week, and I'm sort of hesitant to do it because it sounds a little self-congratulatory, but it's actually more
We're used to it.
at the depths of I think the lived experience of the gospel of.
This is the section where Dave just reassures himself. So
Yes. We will not. We will make fun of Dave while Dave reassures
Are you
himself.
finished, you two? I mean,
Yeah,
keep
we're
it coming.
finished.
I'm here all day. It's an unsolicited review of the Mockingbird Conference that no one wants by Ben Madison. Ben is an Episcopal minister in New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia, and a wonderful church there. And he talks about what was powerful to him about this past weekend. And in doing so, he gets at some very powerful things. He says, at the heart of this ministry, and he's talking about Mockingbird, is the hard truth that everything, everywhere, and everyone begins from a place of need, of lack, of holes to be filled, wounds to be bound. Everything is a cry for help. Because it always begins from a place of our brokenness, not a disembodied brokenness of others, but of the attendees. The most challenging things in life are assumed and not at all shocking. Our parental issues, the death of our loved one, the failure of our ministry, and the crumbling of marriages, friendships, and expectations. As much as we might think that what makes this Mockingbird thing unique is a shared hermeneutic, low anthropology, or a soft spot for Martin Luther, it's really only our brokenness, named and unnamed, done and undone. And, of course, the wounded Savior who meets us in his own wounded and broken body and speaks a word of grace. The wounded have no time for clout chasing. The grieving have no want for platitudes. The dead have no need for grievance. And because this place is awash in wounds, grief, and death, nothing will suffice but the gospel, the saving, gracious, forgiving, helping good news of Jesus Christ at its cleanest, its purest, its most essential. Brokenness met with love, sin met with grace, tears and pain met with laughter. Then it gets subterranean, and he says this. He says, a little over 8 months ago, my daughter, who'd been with us since she was 6 days old and was at that time almost 4, was reunified with her biological family. Over the last 4 years, so much of our hope and the possibility of hope and life and a happy ending involved her. I could laugh at the pain and injury caused by infertility because her little voice was cooing in the back of my first talk. That was it when he spoke at Mockingbird. I could shout and curse and tell everyone I hate how much God intervenes in my life because there she was, all grown up after COVID, a smiling, beautiful representation of so much pain and so much loss, but also so much love and oh, so much hope. Over the years, attendees and friends gave her nothing but love, laughing at her antics, holding her while she slept, made silly faces, and colored and snuck her snacks during the long talks. You checked in on us. You prayed for us. You didn't try to say God has a plan or it'll be all right. You said, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine. You said, we miss her. We still pray for her. This year, she wasn't there. I sat further back than I usually did because even though I didn't expect it, I could almost hear her little laugh at the magic show. We had a big magic show. I knew exactly where she would be playing in the aisle and making friends with random people. This year, even as the pews were filled with new people, there was a void before we even started. This year, I had died. No coming back from this one. And my grief commingled with everyone else's, and in that magic that is the gospel, was met with love and hope, grace and help. My grief and your grief and the grief of the world are met by Christ's love and offering of himself. After the waiting room clears in an emergency, after you see a loved one for the last time, or turn the lights off on your childhood home, or leave a moment that you didn't even realize you'd want to last forever, if after those moments you're left feeling like the void will swallow you whole, please accept this unsolicited review and promise that it's all hard. Everything is so broken. We need more help than we can ever get, but also the gospel is true. God's grace is real, even if it's infuriating. We're here for you. Grief looked in the eyes and met with love. Made me cry when I read it, I gotta say. I know Ben, and I've gotten to see they've gone through this foster care journey, and it rips your heart out. We talked about one of his articles many years ago, but he talked about for Christmas, Mary, did you know? Talking about how, correlating it with the grief that Mary, the mother of Jesus, would have felt in having to give up her son, and that sort of looming over anyone who's a foster parent in such a visceral way. I mean, this sort of thing, I believe it really is an antidote to loneliness. It's not Mockingbird. I think it's the gospel. I think it's the church at its best. I think it's the Holy Spirit really coming amongst people. But there is something about that shared assumption of pain and of need for help that, at least in Ben's case, it sounds like it afforded him the ability to receive love in a way that he didn't even realize. But I don't know. You guys weren't there. What do you think about this article? Is it just a advertisement for Mockingbird, or is it something more?
Well, I'm very good friends with Ben and his wife, Ashley. Ben and I text at least weekly, and I have an incredible amount of compassionate admiration for them because what they've been through has been so hard. And I remember when their little girl was at the conference, I picked her up to help her wash her hands. And all I can think about is this tattoo that I think Ashley has that is of it's like a classic family portrait. She had this done when they lost their daughter. And it's like a classic family portrait in a frame, but the three members of the family are all in like the ghost sheet thing, with the eyes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like such a beautiful symbol of like what's lost and death and suffering. And, one of the reasons why I think Ben and I have probably even gotten closer over the past few years and why I think he probably loves Mockingbird, and I still do too, right? Is like, because there's a sense that like you can suffer here. You don't have to hide it. And that is, there's no place else. I feel like even like the college ministry that I love so much and I got to create, like they could suffer to a point, right? But it was still just like, okay, but like we're all in college and we're really lucky and we're so privileged to be here and like we're at Rice and we worked really hard and you could suffer to a point, right? But then you had to kind of get yourself together. And I think Mockingbird is such a refuge because it's a place that like never asks you to get yourself together. So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful for Ben's reflection and, just praying for them all the time. They have 3 babies now through the foster care system. And I mean, they're just the best. There's nobody better. So,
yeah. But to say that there was someone missing before it even began, and that but that was somehow painful in the extreme, yet also the avenue through which the grace gets in, I can't imagine. Anyway, I really can't imagine, but I do have visions of that wonderful child I got to spend an evening with. RJ, what do you think?
I was just thinking how I get kind of exhausted and a little bit resentful of like all the things God takes away. I do.
Yeah.
And I've experienced I've had a child taken away,
Right.
but I've had quite a few homes taken away. And it was really, really hard. But that seems to be what he does. I mean, and not always,
Sure.
right? There's seasons of like rest and peace and joy, but he seems to, I don't know, the words that Jesus says about like foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, or, giving up fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers for him. And it's just like, what does that even mean? I don't want that. And yet that has felt like at times the reality of my life and like our lives in ministry, and it's just life in general, right? But he shows up, but it does feel like he's saying, I don't know, you got to trust me. You got to trust me. My grace is sufficient for you. In your weakness, my power is made perfect. You got to trust me.
It's interesting that the lectionary passage for this weekend is the stoning of Stephen. When he's like in the middle of being killed by a mob.
Yeah.
And yet he looks to the heavens and says, I see the Son of Man. And then he asks for those who are killing him to be forgiven.
Yeah.
And if that's not a countercultural, invitation.
Oh my God, it's the worst sales pitch, right?
Worst sales pitch.
It's the worst sales pitch in the world.
And yet here you have God at work.
The reality, like RJ was saying, like it is our reality.
In our men's group, we're like Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus is like giving instructions to his disciples before he sends them out, and this morning was like, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. They're going to drag you before magistrates. You're going to get whipped and flogged, and all that sort of stuff. And one of the guys is like, this is the worst pep talk ever. But Jesus also says, don't worry about what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Because the Spirit will be with you, and God knows every hair on your head, and you're so valuable to him, and so don't be afraid. And so it's this weird both and, like crazy shit is going to happen, and it's going to be hard, but I'm going to be with you.
And he also says, I'm going ahead of you to prepare a place for you. I mean, that's the gospel reading for this week. It's, damn it. Again, but it's also deeply, talk about reassurance. That's, that's something, even more transcendent, I suppose.
And the flip side is, just about everyone experiences losses like that at some point in their life. And the choice it's not really a choice, right? But you either believe that God is present and active and loves you and knows what he's doing, or something else.
Yeah.
that he doesn't exist.
Right.
That he doesn't care.
Right.
That he has no power.
Right.
That he's punishing you, and that's infinitely worse.
Yeah.
Infinitely worse.
Yeah.
It's like that story, about the woman whose son gets in a car accident and she goes to the head and hospital and she's dead, and the priest rushes in and says, I want to assure you, God had nothing to do with this.
Oh man.
And she says, please don't take away the only hope I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when tragedy strikes, like the only hope is that somehow there's a loving God who's over it all.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And that's not tragedy spelled with a D-E-I-G-H.
I mean, it is when I say it, but yeah.
Well, I don't think we could possibly get any heavier than that. So why don't we stop now, and we'll reconvene in a couple weeks before we take a little bit of a break for the summer. But thank you guys for talking, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.